Let's be real. No one remembers everything that happened last session, not even the GM. But here's the secret. The right recap doesn't just remind your players what happened, it pulls them back in like a great TV previously on type segment. And whether you're running a weekly game or a once-a-month campaign, session recaps are the bridge that keeps your players connected, immersed, and invested. So, on today's episode of the Bearded Nerd podcast, we're going to talk about how to get the most underrated tool in your toolbox to level up, which is the Humble Session Recap tool. So, with all that being said, let's dive into this episode of the podcast. First and foremost, why is a session recap even important? In my personal experience, I believe that most people forget about 70% of the details in 24 hours. Yes, we can remember the good parts and the fun parts, but in reality, we forget a lot of the detail after 24 hours from that session. And then when you multiply that by a week or 2 weeks or a month, your arc is pretty much toast unless you have some anchor key points. So number one, it's really important to have that memory reset. Number two, from a story continuity perspective, it reminds your players of names, motives, and unresolved plot threads. So think about the NPC that the bard or your other character made a deal with, and then next week you completely forget who that person was. And then you may feel embarrassed to kind of reach out to your GM or the other players, and then it's just a bit of a mess. So it's really good for continuity. Number three, immersion. It triggers a mental costume change, so to speak, and it allows the players to re-enter the world as their characters. And lastly, session recaps matter because it's an on-ramp for your new players. Recaps help new or returning players catch up without crazy info or crazy lore dumps. If you've ever gone hiking, think of a recap as a trail marker in your story. It keeps everyone on the same path and guides people who are maybe behind you, aka new players, or long-time returning players, what the trail and where we're going in the story. Now, you may say to yourself, okay, well, what is the best way to recap a session? In my opinion, there are 4 different ways to recap a session. Number one, the cinematic approach. Last time on this campaign name, this happened, right? You keep it under 90 seconds to about 120. You hit emotional beats, and then you have some sort of narrative framing like the fog still clings to the ruins as the echoes of your last battle fade. Character 1, what are you doing? Right? Something like that. You can kind of recap it in that way. The second, and this is my personal favorite, is the player-led recap. With your recap, you ask a different player, and it can be each week, each session. It just depends on how much time you want to divulge into this, because you can minimize it. You can say, hey, what did your character remember? But every week, every instance, a different player shares what they remember. You can offer inspiration or mechanical bonuses for them stepping up, and it just encourages attentiveness and group responsibility. But the cool thing why I use it and why I think you should use it is because it allows you as the GM to understand what the player experienced, and it allows you to understand the player and the character's perspective from the last session. And the cool thing about this is that you can have a rotation. So you can allow the quieter players at your table to feel included without pressure, right? It's an easy win for something this pivotal in a campaign. Third, the in-world recap, it's usually delivered by an NPC of sorts. It could be a bard or a scribe, it could be an intel officer, it could be some sort of narrator, right? This character acts as a narrator. And this is something that you would maybe institute early on in the campaign so that there's continuity and your players don't feel surprised. However, as I've always said, if you do it the right way, your players will be surprised in a good way. So what I love about the in-world recap, though, is it allows you to kind of step into the narrator role, and it adds a flavor of biasness, misinformation, and personal perspective from that NPC's perspective. Why is this important? Well, I'll give you my perspective. I believe putting in a little bit of NPC biasness is important because it allows the players to see their actions in and coming from the perspective of the world. We've already established that your gaming world should be a living, breathing world. So every NPC is going to have a different perspective. And what you could do is that you can combine number 2 and number 3 together, and instead of a different player, it's a different NPC. Maybe the tavern owner recaps the session based upon what they saw the party members do. And then the next session, it is the cleric doing the same thing. Then it's the enemy, and so on and so forth. Things like that. You bring in a different perspective, and then you can kind of lay some misinformation because, again, the information they're providing, although objectively true, it's based upon their perspective. So it's going to be skewed certain ways and from a certain perspective and point of view, rather. And then lastly, the flashback cutscene. I use this a lot as well because I do run a lot of narrative or cinematic sessions. So again, I've used all 4, but the flashback cutscene is a really cool one. We all know it from pop culture, and it usually begins with some sort of flashback that maybe stood out the most last session. Maybe it's a haunting vision, maybe it is the POV of some sort of NPC. It just could be whatever, but it's a great hook that the party experiences from an emotional perspective before even entering the scene itself. So what do I mean by this? I will show you an example of this from my Star Wars 5e campaign. One of the characters decides to be trained on Mortis. If you're unfamiliar with Mortis, there's a lot of Star Wars lore, but basically they are the supreme beings, so to speak, these mythical beings. And this person decides to be trained by the father, and the other player's character is going to be trained by the son. Now, this player character who's going to be trained by the son on Mortis is going through this dark, deep perspective, right? So if I wanted to kind of use a flashback cutscene, so to speak, to just remind players what happened last time, I could bring a haunting vision of this player character or this, now NPC into the mix and show them what's going on, right? From another perspective, let's kind of dig deep and dig further. If I were to use the second, which is the player-led recap, I can ask the player who plays that fallen Jedi, so to speak, to kind of reprise their role and to give us a perspective of what they're going through, right? So it just depends on how you want to run things. All this is going to be based upon the perspective of your party. Session 0 is extremely important in this matter. This is where you're gathering all this intel. It's why I recommend multiple session 0s. But that is for a different conversation. Let's move forward with how to make a recap stick. In my opinion, you need to make 3 things you need to have 3 things be top of mind to make a recap stick. Number 1, use the character name. It's really simple, but it reinforces the connection to that character and to that NPC. Also, or second, highlight unresolved hooks, right? You can say, hey, y'all have still not checked the basement for XYZ things. It could be the screams that y'all heard last time. It could be whatever little hook you want to put. You can highlight those unresolved hooks. That way it keeps them in kind of the front page, so to speak, of, oh, we still have to do this, and this is an option that we can do, and it kind of triggers other memories. And then lastly, end with urgency, right? You can say, and now the Death Knight raises their blade and shouts your name. Boom. This is, you can kind of move forward and either say roll initiative, or you can kind of step into the scene narratively and go from there. But you want to make sure that you use those 3 simple sticking points because they're simple, easy to use, and easy to implement. You can quite literally use this in your next session later this week. Before we finish this podcast, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Dungeon Soap, for sponsoring this podcast. Dungeon Soap is an awesome handmade TTRPG inspired soap. They are a single creator in the Texas area. They make soap that is vegan, so that there's going to be a lot of love in that soap. And what I love about it is that there's a bunch of unique smells that everyone will love. So if you need to buy some soap to wash your face or other parts of your body, and you love supporting this podcast, use the code BEARDED10 for 10% off your final purchase order. So lastly, let's talk about tools and tech. There are a couple of note-taking tools that I've mentioned in the past, but things that I personally like to utilize. And remember, you can 100% ask your players to start taking notes for recaps. But number 1, you can use Notion, Obsidian, or OneNote. It's great for keeping a bullet-style session notes. You could record it, so you can use Zoom or Discord or whatever your platform, your voice memo, or some sort of voice recording that will allow you to remember everything. Now, if you want bullet points of that, you can take that audio recording, and you could probably use some sort of AI tool that will provide you a summary, like a 1 to 2 minute summary recap in some sort of structure, and then pop it out for you. Now, if you are against using tools like ChatGPT, totally fine, not a problem. You can still record it and kind of go through it the night before so that you remember what you're doing. Very much like if you're just listening to a podcast. And then lastly, there's a bunch of Discord bots and TTRPG journals that great creators create and have made for the community that just allows you to use for your journaling purposes. But more importantly, when I mention TTRPG journals, I want to highlight another aspect, which kind of goes into some of the things that I mentioned earlier about allowing your players to drive the recap. Have them keep a journal and update the session based upon their quote entry. That way, you can pull from that and you know what their perspectives were, and then it doesn't take time from the session, but it also provides you insights into that character's thought process. So, a great recap isn't just a reminder, it's momentum. It invites players to care about what happens next without ever having to say, wait, hold on, who was that NPC again? So whether you're channeling Matt Mercer with an epic intro or just bullet pointing the chaos from last week, make your recaps part of the story and not just the setup. Thank you for listening to the Bearded Nerd Podcast, your source for storytelling tools, world building wisdom, and all things tabletop. If this episode helped you, leave a review, share it with your party, and check out our free recap template and NPC memory tools on Patreon. Much love and keep gaming.